Hello everyone, and welcome to my little video about YouTube ethics and video game media. I'm going to talk about something a bit different from what I usually go on about. I'm not going to be talking about anything related to From Software or one of the Souls games, but instead I'm going to talk about a few thoughts I have, which were prompted by the recent controversy involving something called CSGO Lotto. For those of you who don't know, basically there's been a big hubbub about a couple of YouTubers who were promoting their own CSGO Lotto site, which was basically a CSGO gambling site, and obviously failing to tell people that they own the site and were just promoting on their channels. I'm not going to go into too much detail about what happened and the controversy. The only thing I want to say is that there was a couple of YouTubers who revealed these so-called scam. One was called Honor the Call, it's a very small YouTuber, and then it was picked up by a larger YouTuber called H3 Productions, and then it just basically blew up into this massive thing, and people just went crazy over on the internet. I'm going to link to their videos in the description, so if you actually want to learn more about that particular controversy, go there, because I'm not going to talk about it much longer. I actually want to talk about a much bigger issue, like I said, basically about YouTube and how YouTubers, especially video game YouTubers, are perceived against how traditional games media is perceived. Now, if you're interested in this subject, you know that this is not the first time there's been a scandal related to video games on YouTube. There was a couple of very famous examples. One that comes to my mind is when Microsoft and Machinima were basically giving incentives to people. I'm not sure if actual money was involved, but they were basically giving incentives to people to give positive coverage about the Xbox One, and that was revealed by one of the YouTubers who was offered this I hesitate to use the word bribe, but incentive. And, obviously it blew up from there. And then more recently, there was a game that came out called Shadows of Mordor, which is, by the way, a really good game, really, in my opinion, not the most original game ever, but I bought it, I played it without, anyone having to convince me to buy it, and I really enjoyed it. It had a great system called the Nemesis system, which basically, put that game apart from everything else, and it was a great game. And what happened at the time when it was released was that Warner Brothers, again, paid or offered incentives to people to give positive coverage about the game, going into detail about specifying how many, basically adding links to different parts of the game into their videos, just basically saying only talk about positive things, about being enthusiastic. And, a few rather large YouTubers were involved in this scandal, including our old friend PewDiePie, who's actually one of my favorite YouTubers, who I actually quite like. And whether or not these people did actually anything legally wrong, I think it's hard to say. But again, if you really want to know the details, go and look into it. And I'm sure there's lots of stuff on it on the internet. I don't really want to go into the details about these specific scandals. Like I said, what I actually want to talk about is how YouTubers are viewed compared to how traditional games media is viewed. Now, when I say YouTubers, just to be clear, what I'm talking about is basically a group of people who started out as I think basically uploading their amateur games videos, their let's plays, their opinions on games, and basically uploading it because it was a hobby. They enjoyed doing it, they enjoyed playing games, and they thought, why not just bring it to people, because that's what YouTube's all about. And by games media, I'm talking about, back in the 80s and 90s, you had a whole bunch of small companies that were set up to actually, report about games, do coverage about games events and manufacturers, do previews and reviews. In the UK, we had magazines like the Games Master and Games Informer and so on. And now, with the internet, they've moved online, and you got now large gaming sites like IGN, GameSpot, Videogamer.com, who basically do the same thing. And one thing I want to make clear about these sites is that they are basically, just like YouTubers, entertainers. When it comes to any kind of media, whether it's Fox News or CNN or just IGN talking about games, there's always going to be a certain amount of entertainment. They know that controversy sells, and so to a certain extent, even though they dress themselves up as journalists or reporters, a large extent of what they're doing is trying to entertain you. And obviously there's a lot of editorial that goes on as well. They give their opinions about games, whether it's in their previews and in their reviews. And that's where, the controversy pops up. Because, there's always been this perception, and that's been, going on for a long time, and it's actually, exploded since the advent of the internet, that, so-called games journalists are corrupt, that they take kickbacks from, games publishers. And I'm not 100% sure where I sit on this. I think there is a certain amount of truth in that, but I don't think it's any worse than with what's going on with YouTubers, and that's my main point. Because, one of the biggest controversies that I know about when it comes to traditional games media was when Jeff Gerstmann was fired from GameSpot. He was fired, I think, back in 2007 after he gave apparently a poor review to a game by Eidos Interactive called Kane and Lynch Dead Men, and apparently Eidos Interactive put a lot of pressure on GameSpot to get rid of him, or at least, discipline him in some way, and he ended up getting fired. Now, of course, the way this works, the way the controversy sets in, is that a lot of video game publishers like Eidos, basically pay the livelihood of the games journalists because they provide all the advertising. Traditional games media, whether it's back in paper magazines or in the websites we see today, has never made money from selling the magazines or from subscriptions. It's always made its money from advertising. And of course, who's going to advertise on these sites and the magazines? Games publishers, because they know what the audience is. It was kids like me buying these magazines all the time when they were young for £5 a pop, which is quite a bit of money, but that's not where the real money was. The real money was in advertising. And obviously, as they moved from the paper to online, that controversy has followed these publishers. They've never really been able to get rid of this label that they're inherently corrupt because of their close relationship with the publishers. And I think there's always been a certain level of corruption. I'm sure, this is just an opinion, I have no evidence for it, but I'm sure there's probably been, paid for reviews, and there's always been that certain amount of pressure coming from the publishers who basically pay the wages of these journalists. And I think it's a very human thing as well, which is what brings me back to the YouTubers. Now, as I said, the YouTubers started out as amateurs. Nobody knew where this was going to end up 10, 15 years ago. 10 years ago, when you had the first people uploading video games reviews and opinions and let's plays, nobody knew that they would eventually have millions of subscribers. Literally, PewDiePie is the biggest YouTuber in the world, and I think it's so big now that there's a specific gaming area in YouTube where it's just dedicated to gaming channels, which is a pretty amazing thing considering how big YouTube actually is. But of course, what's happened in the last 5 to 10 years is that it's basically become a business. When people realized there was a lot of money to be made from this, YouTubers became professionals. They started, instead of it being something they did in their spare time, it became their job, their livelihood, because they were making so much money out of it. And because of that, the two big pressures that affect any, business came in. First is the survival instinct, and the second is the profit motive, otherwise known as greed. And that's what you see with, to a certain extent, I think, with these scandals. Publishers know that these guys get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of views per video. So if it's very, very easy for them to offer these guys a certain amount of money. I have no idea how much money it is, or offer them gifts to promote their video, because a lot of them are just kids. A lot of them, if you put like $5, $10, $15,000 in front of their nose just to create a 10-minute video about a game, that's an extremely tempting offer. And I can understand how, at that point, instead of just it being about the games, the greed motive sets in. The other thing, like I said, is survival instinct. When something becomes your, main source of income, the pressure involved to make as much money as possible is great, because these guys, will have pretty much invested all their time in their YouTube channels. They made careers out of this. Some of them apparently have made millions of dollars. And, when that is threatened, or when, you feel as if, there's a lot of pressure and a lot of competition coming from people, the urge to stay on top and to accept these deals, I can imagine, becomes very high. It's very, very tempting to be that, you know, once you've got millions of subscribers, to get the exclusives, to get early access. And, you know, that's when even the softer forms of corruption, I mean, I use the word corruption, but, you know, that's a very controversial term at this point. You know, the softer forms of temptation come in because, you know, you get all sorts of things. Like recently, when the Dark Souls 3 came out, we know that some YouTubers were given early access to the game. They were invited to early access events months before it was released. And obviously, I think, actually, when I say obviously, I mean, I guess they were given like incentives. They were paid in their hotels, their food and everything was paid for, and there's a lot of pressure at that point for people to give, you know, positive reactions, because, you know, the publishers aren't just, you know, a business relationship for you anymore. There's somebody who's actually almost becomes a friend, because they're so nice to you all the time. They're giving you all the stuff. They're paying for your food, for your hotel, for, you know, telling you how great your channel is. I can understand why, you know, that can really seep into people's psyche, and how, you know, tempting it is for them, people even subconsciously, to give a positive reaction for games. And then, of course, like I said, you've got the early access, which, you know, I think tips the scales for certain YouTubers. You know, the people who are already big, who the publishers are interested in, will become even bigger, because they're the ones who will get the early access to the games. And even if they don't get money for that, the fact that they can actually, you know, launch previews and reviews and let's plays earlier than anybody else means that they will get the views, which means that, you know, they'll get the advertising dollars, and that's just how it works. And, you know, look, the point I'm trying to make is basically that at the end of the day, these people are just human. And I think that games journalists, the traditional games journalists, have been given a really bad rap recently. I think there was this whole thing in the last 2 or 3 years, especially, where people are like, oh, these journalists are evil. We should trust the YouTubers because YouTubers are like us. And that, I think, is very true. I think a lot of these YouTubers, even people like PewDiePie, who are really big right now, are like us, because they're just gamers who basically made a job out of their hobby, which is fantastic. But I would also argue that the games journalists, you know, who are in traditional media, are like that as well. They've just gone down a different path. They're people who love video games. You can't talk or play or interact with video games 24 hours a day without really liking it. You know, you can't just do it. You know, that's what motivates these people at the end of the day. And for me, the traditional games journalists, or whatever you want to call them, are no different now from these big YouTubers. It's exactly the same thing. They both have the same pressures, they both have the same desires, and they both can fall into the same traps. So I think, you know, people, you know, as a community of gamers, we really have to take stock. We really have to, you know, be critical, first of all, about the information we take. It's very hard when you're a young kid, and young kids have to be protected from these scammers, you know, people like apparently CSGO Lotto guys, whoever they are. But, you know, I think we as adults have to be very critical and, you know, call people out, yes, when it's appropriate, but also give people the time to explain themselves, whether it's, you know, IGN or, you know, a big YouTuber. And, you know, we also, I think, have to be critical about how we analyze the information we take, because, you know, like I said, there's no real difference in my mind between the PewDiePies of this world and IGNs. It's just a different perspective of the same thing. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I really wanted to talk about today. Like I said, I'm not really that interested in controversy, but, you know, this is a subject that I find really interesting, and, you know, I really want to hear what you guys have to say. So, you know, definitely, if you got another opinion on this, or if you agree with me or whatever, you know, leave a comment. Let's get a discussion going. This is something that I think is important and it's worth talking about. So definitely leave a comment if you really want to, if you've got something to say. And if you agree with me, obviously leave a like, and let's do that gamification thing. Let's play a game. So if you disliked and you disagree with what I said, leave a dislike, and if you like it, leave a like, and let's see how things go. Okay guys, thanks a lot. I'm going to obviously do a lot more Bloodborne and Souls videos in the future. That's really my main thing, so nothing's really changing. I'm not turning into a political channel or anything. I'm just going to keep going the way I am. Okay guys, thanks a lot, and I will speak to you soon. Bye.